Welcome to another episode of Full Build Friday, where I try to build a character from a comic, game, or similar source using the baseline rules of Pathfinder Second Edition and the Path Builder app. It's one of those weeks where I had a different build in mind before I realized that the character was best saved for after the release of Player Core 2. While this build does borrow something from that book, it is mostly fine as we explore Marrow from Marvel Comics.
She could tell right away that I was bad to the bone, bad to the bone, bad to the bone.
I was first introduced to Marrow through Marvel vs. Capcom, but have since delved into the character within the comics. We're going to be looking at a little bit of both for this build, so let's go ahead into the Bone Zone, not that kind, and establish some build goals for her. Marrow, born as Sarah Rushman, was one of the Morlocks, sewer-dwelling mutants that were massacred by the villainous Marauders. She was spirited away to a separate dimension, where she was raised in the extreme Darwinist philosophy of survival of the fittest, until she was placed into a mutant terrorist cell. She has since bounced between villainy and heroism with the X-Men several times, living an overall rough life. The name of Marrow comes from her hyper-accelerated metabolism, which is most obviously expressed through the numerous bone growths all over her body. She can control the growth, shape, and toughness of her bone structure, and can grow them into blades, spikes, or claws. She's even able to remove these bones and throw them as bone blades or spears. Ripping these bones out still hurts Marrow, but her powers also grant her quickened healing, ensuring that such wounds swiftly close. She even had a second heart that saved her from death when the first one was ripped out. On the more mundane side of things, she is regarded as an expert in hand-to-hand combat, who specializes in street fighting that borders on just feral ferocity. In conclusion, Marrow's unique power allows her to wield her very body as a weapon, drawing blades and spikes made of bone and even hurling them at distant enemies. She strikes out with savagery while her enhanced metabolism makes her a difficult opponent to put down, to the point where she's survived the loss of a heart. Comic books were my first real introduction to nerddom, so I'm always happy to put together a character from them. With that being the case, it is time to get into the bare bones of this build. To start with, we are going to use the Shisk Ancestry, relying on the bone quills to represent her bone growths. After having never used this ancestry before, it is kind of funny using it a second time so soon after the first. Though unfortunately I'm not really showing off anything new, we are going to stick with a lot of what we saw before, starting with the Quillcoat Heritage and the Spine Stabber Ancestry feat. The former allows her to stab enemies that attack her, and is actually some nice representation for her anti-air Towering Spine move from Marvel vs. Capcom. In the case of a feat, this allows her to use her spines as a weapon, which very importantly have the finesse trait, even though she will be focusing on strength. Now why that matters, we'll have to wait until we get to her class. There obviously isn't a terrorist background, which led to this build using the insurgent background as a sort of stand-in for that idea. You could reach further back in her history and use the street urchin background, relating to her time with the Morlocks, but while she doesn't use the deception skill or the lengthy diversion skill feat it provides, the warfare lore skill of the insurgent feels appropriate for this character. For this build, and if I'm being honest, for many builds within Pathfinder Second Edition, there are a number of ways you could go. It does obviously depend on what aspects of the character you wish to focus on, but in this case, I will be building Marrow as a rogue of the Ruffian Racket. This gives her a focus on strength and intimidation that I think fits with her brutal, almost savage fighting style, though unfortunately the Ruffian's ability to expand the rogue sneak attack options don't apply to unarmed attacks. However, Marrow's spines have the finesse trait, which is enough to make them something that she can sneak attack with, even if she's using her strength to attack with it. As to her class feat, she'll take You're Next, being the best fit out of her first level options, and letting her menace an enemy as a reaction. As a rogue, she does also receive a skill feat, which she can use to take Catfall, mainly so that she can pull off those classic superhero landings. As a rogue, Marrow is trained in stealth, while her racket makes her trained in intimidation. Furthermore, she becomes trained in acrobatics, arcana, athletics, medicine, nature, society, survival, and thievery. Now as a ruffian, she is going to prioritize strength among her ability scores, though she spreads out her other ability scores pretty evenly. Focusing on Constitution or Charisma are probably going to be the most helpful for her down the line, but she doesn't really even need to focus on Dexterity, since she can wear medium armor as a ruffian. For Marrow's second level class suit, there are two ways to go, and I'm going to cover both of them. For the first of them, I want to reach into something I have never done before. Deviant Powers. These are effectively superpowers that were introduced in the Dark Archives book, and a fantastic way to represent her powers as a mutant. Specifically, she'll dip into the Troll subset of powers to take Bone Spikes. This simply further explores her ability to create different weapons of bone, and I like that it has different traits from her spines to demonstrate that. There is an unfortunate aspect of it, as these weapons made from bone spikes lack the agile or even the finesse trait, meaning she cannot sneak attack with them since her unarmed attacks. If this is enough to discourage you from taking this option, I'd pick up Strong Arm from heroic feats, since Marrow does have a tendency to rip out her bones and throw them at people. On the skill side of things, since she's a rogue, she gets to increase her intimidation to expert, which will allow her to take intimidating prowess as her skill feat. This will be handy in demoralizing creatures that can't understand Marrow, while also giving her a bonus to menacing such monsters when she can display her physical strength. Coming in at third level is Toughness as Marrow's general feat, which will give her more hit points and make her recovery checks easier. She follows an increase to Athletics with a Quick Jump skill feat. It's not necessary to take it, but Marrow is one of the more physical mutants. She's not out there reading minds, blasting people with energy, or anything like that. She's just smacking people around with her own bones that she pulls from her body, and this will help her navigate whatever arena she fights in a little bit faster. Fourth level is another split decision for this bony berserker. If you stuck with Bone Spikes at second level, she can take Awakened Power for her Bone Spikes and gain the ability to give them reach. Marrow has formed bone spears and the like from her body, which this helps in representing, but there's still the issue of not being able to sneak attack with it. She could just use these attacks when she can't get an enemy off guard, or, again if that doesn't suit your fancy, she could take up Dread Striker. This will allow her to get enemies off guard simply by making them frightened. The issue is just keeping them that way. In regards to her skills, she becomes an expert in acrobatics, but will take Powerful Leap as her skill feat. This again enhances her physicality, letting her leap farther and get quicker into the fray. By taking Renewing Quills as her 5th level ancestry feat, Marrow can use her Barbed Quills reaction once every 10 minutes, a vast improvement to the once per day restriction. While it wasn't something I originally considered, I like taking Streetwise as her skill feat here, so that she can use her society and connections to the people of the streets, such as the other Morlocks, to gather information. However, I want to take her skill increase for this level to Stealth, making her an expert in it so that she can try to take advantage of her surprise attack class feature. We're looking at another bit of a detour away from the Rogue class at 6th level to take a Barbarian Dedication, representing Marrow's savagery and fury. This is a bit more representative of her time in the X-Force comic, which is the last thing that I read her in, where she was always a second away from going absolutely ballistic. Many of the instincts don't seem to quite fit her concept, leaving her to rely on the Fury instinct and become trained in crafting. Now with her focus on intimidation, she will take Terrifying Resistance as her skill feat, while her skill increase will go to Society, so that she can get more use out of that Streetwise feat that she just picked up. Marrow goes and takes Fast Recovery as her 7th level Ancestry feat, as a stand-in for her hyperactive metabolism and the enhanced healing that she demonstrates after ripping one of her bones out. With an increase to Intimidation making her a master in it, she can take up Battle Cry for her skill feat. This is an excellent feat to help her start combat, especially if she has the Dread Striker feat, so that she can start off with an enemy already off guard. For the 8th level class feat of this Osseous Overlord, she uses Basic Fury to take Raging Intimidation. This will allow her to demoralize while she's raging, and automatically grants her Intimidating Glare. It isn't terribly useful at this point, but it will also give her the best skill feat in the game if she becomes a legend in Intimidation. On the topic of that skill, she'll use Terrified Roar as her actual skill feat, to send weak foes running so that she can focus on the more dangerous adversaries. While the Ruffian Racket grants Marrow the critical specialization effects for strikes against off-guard enemies, this for some reason only applies to weapons, not her unarmed attacks. To help that a little bit, she takes Piercing Quills as her Ancestry feat at 9th level, which will allow her to apply a bleed effect to any crits with her quills. After becoming a master in stealth thanks to this level's skill increase, Marrow can take Swift Sneak as her skill feat so that she can sneak around at her full speed, which might help her get off a surprise attack. With the investment that Marrow has already made in the Barbarian archetype, and that she will continue to make, she gets some good use out of Barbarian resiliency, since she will be hurling herself into the thick of it during combat. She'll continue the concept of Streetwise with Eyes of the City, letting her call upon the Morlock allies that she's been the leader of in some instances. To aid the effect of both of these feats, she becomes a master in society. We're just a bit beyond Swift Sneak, but taking Fleet as Marrow's 11th level general feat will let her move faster in general, and also jump a bit farther when she uses a leap. By increasing Marrow's acrobatics up to master, she can then take Kippa, which might be the most generally useful skill feat in the game, letting a character spring up as a free action after being knocked prone, without provoking reactions. Although Marrow has been on a number of teams, she remains rather standoffish and independent, which influenced the inclusion of the Sly Striker class feat at 12th level. This lets her get in some extra damage even when the target isn't off guard. Unfortunately, this still only applies to attacks that could trigger sneak attack, so she still can't make use of her bone spikes. As to her skill feat, I think Too Angry to Die is a perfect fit for her. It calls to mind how difficult she is to kill, with the likes of her healing and second heart, while also allowing her to draw upon her intimidation skill. With most of her other skills already at master, this time, Marrow will become an expert in thievery. I've talked before about Marrow throwing her bones as projectiles, and while she could invest in throwing weapons and the like, I think there's another option with her Quill Spray Ancestry feat. This allows her to launch a spray of quills for some decent damage in a 30-foot cone. They even come with bleed damage for characters that critically fail their save against them, and I think is a great fit to represent this. She'll grab Combat Climber as her skill feat, as I swear I remember reading an issue where she climbed by stabbing her bone spikes into a wall, and she accompanies this with a skill increase to Thievery, making her a master in it. We've explored some bleeding in this build already through Marrow's Quills, and Bloody Debilitation at 14th level further delves into that. I honestly really like this as a debilitation, because most of them have a limited duration, but this lasts as long as a bleed does. More relative to the character, bones are very sharp when they break, and I imagine that's sort of what Marrow's are like, and this ability helps to demonstrate that. On the other hand, Underground Network is a perfect way to represent the Morlocks. This skill feat allows Marrow to make use of a group to gather information, and that just slots in beautifully in my opinion. Now, while it is a bit late, I do have her become an expert in survival here, to more represent her time in that separate dimension, where it was very much survival of the fittest. 15th level brings us into the final stretch, and starts us off with Die Hard as her general feat. And this is probably one she should have taken earlier, given that she has survived having a heart ripped out. I just couldn't get around to it. She will take Wall Jump as her skill feat, but more importantly, by becoming a legend in Intimidation, she will automatically gain, thanks to Raging Intimidation, Scare to Death. I'm not going to gush about this skill feat, I've already done that enough, but just know I am hyped to have it in any build I can fit it in. Calling back to Marrow's earlier levels, we have two ways to go at level 16. Both options represent her healing factor, and the main differences mainly lie in their mechanics. If you already took the Deviant feats, you could stick with that and take High Speed Regeneration, to heal up a solid bit as a free action. But then you will have to make that flat check for using her power. Or if you don't want to chance that, if you haven't invested in the Deviant feats and don't want to start, she could use Advanced Fury for Renewed Vigor, to use a single action to continually grant herself temporary hit points as a sort of stand-in for this effect. This is a smaller amount of HP, but one that she can use more regularly, and that has the added benefit of increasing her baseline HP thanks to her Barbarian resiliency. As for her skills, she will become a legend in Athletics, which will allow her to take Cloud Jump as her skill feat. This is mainly to allow her to heroically leap into the fray from afar, or, depending on how she's feeling that day, villainously leap into the fray from afar. With Marrow's final Ancestry feat at 17th level, she'll take Bristle, mainly just to further explore her barbed quills and unarmed attack options, and because the armor class bonus it provides may help offset the penalty that she takes from raging. Following the same concept as Combat Climber, she will then also grab Underwater Marauder as her skill feat, which is partially inspired by her residence in the sewers as a Morlock. On the topic of her underdwelling allies, she'll become a legend in society thanks to her skill increase. This may be a bit of a boring option, but I do like Juggernaut's Fortitude as Marrow's 18th level class feat. This will make her a master in Fortitude saves, while also providing her with a few extra hit points, again thanks to that resiliency feat. I think this is important in representing her enhanced metabolism and general toughness. She then takes Say That Again as another intimidation skill feat that plays into her confrontational nature, and also becomes a legend in acrobatics. Marrow, like many comic book characters, has died and since come back, most notably during the time that Storm killed her by ripping out her heart. Regardless, Numb to Death is a fantastic fit for the character. It's just a matter of qualifying for it by this point within your campaign. She will take Legendary Sneak as her skill feat so that she can try to get hidden in the midst of a fight to land those sneak attacks, which is permitted only by her increasing her stealth to Legendary with her skill increase. Rounding out this build is Impossible Striker as Marrow's final class feat, which means she is just always dishing out extra damage based on her sneak attack even if the victim isn't off guard. I do think that it's a little weird that this doesn't give anything to benefit you when you're attacking off guard enemies. They're just easier to hit, but it's a good bit of damage. We're just going to roll with it. She finalizes her skill feat with Quick Climber, using her spikes to swiftly ascend when she has to. Finally, the skeleton of our character is completed as she becomes a legend in Thievery. But what about a game using a free archetype rule, you say? Well, Barbarian is an easy choice that would allow her to take more options such as Raging Thrower, Swipe, Pain Tolerance, and Renewed Vigor alongside her Deviant feats. This also frees up some of her Rogue feats, which could allow her to expand on her ranged combat capability with the likes of Quick Draw, Bullseye, and Far Throw. Or she could take up Head Stomp since she mainly uses unarmed combat anyway. That covers the build for Marrow. We've dressed up our skeleton quite nicely, so let's go ahead and review. Marrow is a Quillcoat Shisk ruffian rogue, with the insurgent background to represent her rearing and indoctrination into a group of mutant terrorists. Diehard, Toughness, and Numb to Death all serve to sell Marrow's sheer survivability, most prominently demonstrated when Storm tore out her heart and she kept kicking. Her main power is her hyper-accelerated metabolism, which is at least partially represented by just her ancestry. The bone quills of the Shisk stand in for the bones that she grows out of her body, and she learns to weaponize them through spine stabber and piercing quills, while she can throw them, as she is wont to do, with quill spray. Dipping into deviant abilities fantastically represents her nature as a mutant, while representing her specific power through bone spikes, awakened power to give them reach, and high speed regeneration. While she can't sneak attack with these bone spikes, they are handy for representing the range of bone weapons that she can create. Her healing factor is further represented by her Renewed Vigor, while the Barbarian archetype in general is excellent for representing her descent into savagery that was more prominent in the X-Force comics. In short, Marrow uses an arsenal of bones thanks to her Spine Stabber, Bone Spikes, and feats that enhance them, while she can launch them with Quill Spray. She stays in the fight, landing underhanded blows with help from her toughness, barbarian resiliency, and high speed regeneration. Belligerent at best and bordering on being a baddie, this Berserker babe bears bountiful batterings during her blitz, battling with bone blades, bolts, and bludgeons. It was fun to put together another comic book build, but let me know what you think of it and what other builds you'd like to see. If you want to check out the other builds I've already done, or see the item suggestions for this build, you can check out the blog or Twitter, linked below. Thanks for watching, and have a fantastic Friday.
Spooky, scary skeletons and shivers down your spine.